In this section, I will show you how to generate a new Angular application, set up the routing, mock the backend data, build a service for fetching that data, and build a component that will use this service and then show the spinner and show homes in a clean, responsive style. Before we can generate our brand new Angular application, we need to make sure that we have ng CLI installed in our system. For that, let's run npm install Angular CLI with the G flag. And now we can use it to generate our brand new application. So we'll do ng new and then the name of our project, which is Home Rentals, and hit enter. And then it is asking if we want routing in our application, and we say yes. We would like some pre-configured routing. And then the next question is about CSS engine for our application, which to my preference, I will choose less. And then it generates our application. And after that, we can use an ng serve command to serve it. But let's change the directory to go into our project. And then from here, we can run the command ng serve to serve this new Angular application locally and see what it looks like. All right, open it in the browser in localhost 4200, and this is it. So now the next step is to add UIKit CSS framework to it. For that, I go back to the terminal, open another pane where I go into the directory with our project, and then run the command to open the code base in Visual Studio Code. And in VS Code, I find index.html file, which is the main template of our application. And then here I will need to paste the references to UIKit CSS framework. Before I can paste the URLs with the CSS and JavaScript, I need to get those URLs. So I go to UIKit installation guide, and in there, find these links pointing to CDN with CSS and JavaScript, and just paste them in the head section of the template. Now, after that, everything should just work. So reloading the app, nothing seems to be broken, and we're good to proceed to the next step. Once we have our app created, let's define the default route and the component. So go to the conveniently generated by ngCLI routing component, where it has this default routes array, and in that array, define the only route that we'll have in the application, which will be homes, and that route, when you access it, it will load homes component. And since homes component doesn't exist yet, let's go to the terminal and generate it using ngCLI command, that is ng generate component, and then the name of the component homes. And I'll add a flag for skipping generating the tests since we don't need them. All right, now here I can import this newly generated component using VS Code auto import feature. And when I go to the application and go to the homes route, I see all the standard stuff in the template, except that in the router outlet portion, we can see the output from our newly generated component. Now, let me remove all this extra stuff that is pre-generated in the application so that it's not distracting. So go to app component HTML and just select everything except the router outlet that outputs our components that are routed, and delete it and save it. And now we see that it only shows what router outlet shows, which is under the homes path. It is our newly generated homes component. Now I'd like to fix one thing. Notice when I go to the default path, which is nothing, it doesn't show anything. And that's because we don't have anything set up in the routing that will display anything under the default route. So what I want to do is declare a new routing rule where I will say that when you go to the default route, which is nothing, just empty string, I'd like it to redirect to our homes route, which will be our default route if we do it this way. And then I have to specify a path match mechanism to be full for the redirect to work. Now in the application, if I try to go to the default route, it properly redirects me to the homes route. And just to confirm that this displays the content of our newly generated homes component, I'm going to open the homes component template in VS Code, and here it is. I see that it shows the exact string that I see in the browser. Now I'm going to do one little thing, which is I'm going to remove the .less file for this homes component. It is for styling, and we're not going to do any extra styling for this component, so I'm just going to remove it and remove this reference from here. Now reload the app, just make sure nothing is broken, and it's looking good. Now, before we can start writing code that will show the homes for listing and do all the styling and all that, we need to have some sort of mocked data that we will pretend that the backend returns to us when our application is asking for a list of homes to display. I'm going to do that by going into the assets folder of the application and creating a new file, which I'll call homes.json. And it will be a JSON file that will be one big array of objects, where each object will be representing a individual home, and each home will have a few properties. First one will be image URL, which will contain the link to the image for the home that we will display in the UI. And then another property will be type, which later we will use for implementing the filtering capability, where you will be able to filter by type such as apartment, house, or room. And then another property will be location, so that we just have it to show it in the UI. And then the last property will be title, which is just purely for the display and demonstration purposes as well. And I just make up whatever the values for these properties. And then I'm going to have a bunch of these objects for each individual home in this list, where each property will be something different, or at least some variation of it. All right, and that's all we need to mock the list of homes, so our application can display it in the UI. Once we have mocked data to display in our application, the next step is to create a service that will fetch this data. So here I use ng-CLI again. I say ng generate service, and then the name of the service is data. And again, I skip generating the tests since we don't need them. And once the service is generated, I'm gonna open it here in VS Code and declare the only method that we will need at the moment, and it will be getHomes. And in here, I'm going to return the result of using HTTP client in its get method to query or to request the homes JSON file from our assets folder. However, we need to make sure to import HTTP client module in our application. So I need to go to app module, and then here I'm going to add an import for HTTP client module on top of the file. And then make sure to import it in the imports array right here. Now go back to the data service, and here we should be able to inject our HTTP client. And I declare it as a private property, say HTTP client, and it will be the instance of HTTP client from Angular core. Now, once we have the data service that is capable of fetching homes, we're going to inject it into our homes component right here. Make sure you import it at top of the file. And then we are going to create a property on this component, which will be homes with a little $sign indicating that it is an observable. And then we are going to assign into the property the result of calling getHomes of the data service. So now we have this property that refers to the observable, and we can use it in our template. So I'm going to do something very simple here. I'm going to refer to the homes property, and I'd like to pass it through the JSON pipe so I can just see the result of what it returns from the backend. And since it is an observable, I need to make sure that I subscribe to it using the async pipe. And if I reload the page, I see that the template successfully fetched the data using the data service from the assets folder, and it is displaying that data directly on the page. Now we can start building out functionality that'll display each individual homes in a nice styled fashion. And since our component now has access to the homes data, we can start building out the functionality for displaying that. So let's comment out this piece for a moment and start by creating a title for the component, which will be homes in h1 tag. And then here it sticks to the edges of the page too closely, so I'm going to place that into UK container as a component declared in UIKit CSS framework. It just adds some nice padding and margin to it. Well, it adds margin, so I'm going to add a little bit of padding to it as well. And then when I place home inside of it and reload the page, now homes is not sticking to the edges too closely. Now let me grab this subscription that we create using async pipe right here, and then use it to create this div with ng4 structural directive, where I declare a loop that uses the subscription like that, and then it has access to each individual home to display just like this, where I can show the title for each individual home. And here, after reloading, you can see that it lists titles for all the homes that we have declared in our mocked file. Now I'm going to go to UIKit card component and see an example of where they have cards with images. It's all the way almost at the bottom, and here is an example. So I'm just going to grab the example HTML from here and paste it in my template. And I'm going to remove this UK card default class since I don't need it. And the first thing I can set is the image. And remember, each home has image URL property that refers to the image. So I'm just going to specify right here. And I'll delete the alt property. And then next, in the card body, I'm going to show home type and home location. Actually, I'm going to put those into a separate div so that I can have another div next to it for showing the home title. And that makes use of all the properties that we have in the home. And after reloading the page, we can see all that displayed using UIKit card formatting. Let's do a little bit of cleanup around this styling. First, let's remove all this extra padding around home type, location, and the title. So I'm going to remove the padding from the body Alright, this looks a little better. And then I'm going to add quite a bit of styling to type and location. I'm first going to make the text muted, and then I'm going to make it uppercase, and I'm going to make it smaller, and I'm going to make it bold, and finally, I'm going to make sure that it is truncate when it is too long to display in the card. Alright, this looks great. Now with the title, I'm only going to make sure that the text is bold using UK Text Bold class. All these classes are coming from UIKit CSS framework. Alright, individual home looks good now. However, if I expand this page, everything is displayed in a single column. So let's fix that. I'm going to create a new div here that will use UK grid formatting from UIKit, and I'm going to place the piece of code that generates all the homes inside of that new div, so every home is in the CSS grid. Now if I expand the page, it generates the grid, but I don't like how it shows only 2 columns when the page is full width. So let's make a couple of adjustments here. I'm going to add a class and use the width utility classes from UIKit to say that every child in the grid must occupy 30% of the width. Now this looks almost good. When I expand the page, it looks good, but when the page is small, 3 columns is too many. So I'm going to add a designation to this class that will say to apply it only on small screens and bigger. That means that when the screen is small, there will be only single column because every column will occupy 100% of width. However, if I start expanding the page, it starts being bigger than small, and therefore the class is being applied and we see 3 columns here. And now it looks great. And just one tiny little adjustment I'd like to make here is to make sure that the height of every cell in the grid matches, so it looks even a little bit better. Now it's perfect. And we can remove this commented out piece. And we're done for this video. When we reload our application, notice how the list of homes is displayed almost instantly. However, remember that list is coming as a result of making an API call against homes JSON file where we mock our homes, and that is an asynchronous call against our assets folder, and it returns so quickly because it is served from the same server as this application. However, that is rarely the case for real applications, and real API calls take a little bit longer to complete. So now let's go ahead and simulate what happens when we add an artificial delay to our call to fetch the list of homes. For that, I'm going to use the pipe function on the observable that returns the list of homes, and I'm going to add the delay operator from RxJS that allows us simulating 2-second delay where it will wait for 2 seconds before returning the list of homes. Alright, and when we reload our application, we see that the page title appears right away. However, the list of homes takes a couple of seconds to appear, and during that, our page just looks blank, which is obviously not a good user experience. So what we're missing here is some kind of indication that the data is being loaded from the backend. So let's take care of that. Let's go into the component template. And here, let's revisit how this works. So this part is subscribing to the homes observable, which makes that API call in the data service. And then in this ng for loop, it generates a whole bunch of these homes inside of the card showing home details. So what I'm going to do here is extract or copy this part that subscribes to homes and then place it in this separate div inside of ngIf structural directive, essentially subscribing to the list of homes inside of this ngIf and then giving it a name as a variable name as homes, but without the $sign. And then I'm grabbing the part that contains the ng for loop and all the cards and putting it inside of this div with the ngIf statement. And what this allows us to do here is that we can grab the homes variable that we declared here and then replace the original subscription here of the async pipe and just use that homes variable. And when we reload the page, everything just working the exact same way, so nothing changed here. However, what this allows us to do is that in this ngIf statement where we subscribe to homes and declare homes variable, we can also declare an else statement and then specify which portion of the template must be displayed when the homes observable did not receive any homes from the API yet. So I'll call this portion of the template loading, just like this. And then down here, I'm going to declare that portion of the template using ngTemplate directive, where I will give it the name, the loading, just exactly the same as I specified in the ngIf statement. And here, I'll just type in loading, just to see that it works. And here, when I reload the page, for this couple of seconds, when we're waiting for the response from the backend, we see loading is displayed right here, so it is working. All right, but showing just loading word is pretty lame, so that's why let's go to UIKit spinner component and grab the examples of how to show spinner and stick it in here instead of the loading word. And reload the page, and here we have a nice little spinner. That's much better. I just want to make it a little bit bigger, setting the ratio of 3. That looks better. And it just needs to be aligned to the middle, so I'll set the class using UK align center and UK text center. And that should put the spinner in the middle of the page, just like that. All right, and this completes our application.